Welcome back, everyone. So glad you're here. Today's explainer is a big one. We're diving straight into week 10 of the BTM 440 material, and honestly, we're looking at a massive paradigm shift in how we protect information. Think about it. The traditional corporate network is basically dead, and that changes literally everything about IT security. The old rulebook? Toss it out. The way we govern our digital assets has to completely evolve. Okay, let's really dive into this. Where exactly does your organization's network actually end? Seriously, take a second and think about that. Back in the day, you could just confidently point to a physical firewall or, the literal walls of your office building. But today, that perimeter is gone. Computing has entirely left the building. Those physical cables that used to tie everything down are history. And honestly, a lot of companies don't even own the devices their employees are using to access highly sensitive data anymore. The boundaries are just completely blurred now, which entirely rewrites the fundamental rules of cybersecurity. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit the new risk landscape, explore virtualization and container risks, unpack cloud shared responsibility, look at wireless network vulnerabilities, dive into mobile security and BYOD, and finally, we'll tie it all together by securing MediBec's future. All right, let's jump into Section 1, the new risk landscape, specifically focusing on the MediBec case. To make all these abstract concepts a bit more concrete, we're going to use MediBec as our anchor today. If you're not familiar, they're a premier medical center headquartered right in Montreal with clinics spread all across Quebec. And the reality is pretty intense. They hold mountains of highly sensitive patient data. But to operate seamlessly across an entire province, they have to rely on a borderless, heavily interconnected digital ecosystem. And here's the catch. Every single one of those digital intersections that patient care relies on, it's also a potential gateway for cyber adversaries. They've actually seen a sharp escalation in attacks since 2020. So the stakes literally could not be higher. A breach here isn't just about taking a financial hit, we're talking about severe privacy violations and even medical fraud.
Moving on to Section 2, Virtualization and Container Risks, or what I like to call the illusion of hardware.
Let's start right at the foundation. Virtualization is all about creating a logical computing environment that's completely decoupled from any specific physical machine. So instead of having one operating system tied to one dedicated, clunky physical server humming away in MediBec's basement, you've got multiple, isolated environments running on a single shared host. And look, from a business perspective, this is a massive strategic advantage. It gives organizations this incredible elastic scaling. They can spin up new resources in minutes instead of waiting weeks to buy and install new hardware. Plus, this portability drastically improves resiliency, but as we'll see, it also fundamentally changes your threat surface.
Because, well, while portability is fantastic, it also heavily concentrates your risk. The hypervisor, which is the software that actually allocates resources to each of those virtual machines, suddenly becomes a massive high-value target. If an attacker breaks that, they break the isolation across everything running on that physical hardware. But here's the surprising part. The biggest risks here usually aren't some exotic zero-day hackers in hoodies deploying complex hypervisor exploits. Nope. They are boring, everyday governance failures. We're talking excessive administrative privileges, weak identity controls, and unmanaged virtual machine sprawl where IT literally forgets which servers are even running. It's just a failure of operational control, plain and simple.
Which brings us to Section 3, Cloud Shared Responsibility, and one of my absolute favorite concepts, the landlord analogy.
Let's briefly contrast our deployment models here. On one hand, you've got the public cloud. This is shared infrastructure accessible over the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. On the other hand, you have the private cloud, which gives you dedicated computing resources hosted either on-premises or at a third-party data center, offering you a lot more enhanced control. So when MediBec decides to move, say, their patient portal from a server down the hall out into the public cloud, those systems effectively leave the building. At that point, cybersecurity is way less about putting a physical lock on a clinic door and way more about managing shared responsibility through really strict contracts and smart architecture choices.
And this brilliantly illustrates what I mean by the landlord analogy. Think of your cloud provider, whether that's AWS or Microsoft Azure, as the landlord. They are responsible for the security of the cloud. So they secure the building's physical structure, the hardware, the global infrastructure, the cooling systems, all that stuff. You don't have to worry about the actual physical padlocks on their data centers. But you, as the customer, you are the tenant. You are responsible for security in the cloud. If you leave your virtual apartment door wide open because you misconfigured a server, well, that's entirely on you. You've got to manage your own data, your identity and access management, and your own firewall rules. Looking at this breakdown, whether you're using infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, securing the physical infrastructure is always the provider's job. Now, in SaaS, the provider does take on more responsibility, like managing the applications and network controls, but I want you to notice the constant here, right at the top row. No matter what service model you choose, the customer, meaning your organization, always retains ultimate governance responsibility for the data and the content. You can never outsource the liability of your own data. If MediBec's patient records leak from some SaaS application, it's MediBec making the front page news, not the software vendor.
All right, Section 4, Wireless Network Vulnerabilities, or, as I call them, invisible threats.
So the crucial point is this number right here. Historically, a whopping 15% of healthcare-related cyber incidents trace back to a single source, compromised wireless networks. Think about it. Getting rid of physical cables is amazing for mobility, right? Doctors can carry tablets from room to room, but it introduces these totally invisible attack vectors. Imagine an attacker just sitting quietly in a clinic waiting room with a rogue router hidden in their backpack. If they exploit weak encryption or default settings to quietly hop onto the Wi-Fi, well, once they're riding that network, they can snoop on traffic, install malware on connected medical devices, or literally extract patient data right through the walls. It's a massive invisible vulnerability.
So, what's the actual fix here? For a place like MediBec, mitigating this requires some seriously strict governance. They have to employ robust encryption standards, like WPA3, across every single clinic location. They absolutely must regularly update and patch their network equipment to kill off known flaws. They need to be monitoring wireless network traffic for anomalies, like a massive data transfer suddenly happening at 2 a.m. They also need to implement strong password policies, change those awful factory default passwords, and conduct frequent wireless security assessments. These are not just annoying IT chores. They are absolutely non-negotiable governance steps required to protect patient lives. Let's transition into Section 5, Mobile Security and BYOD, specifically dealing with unmanaged devices.
There's this fantastic core principle from our BTM 440 material that says a practical governance posture is to treat devices we cannot manage as an exception category requiring explicit approval. I really want to hit the nail on the head with this one. Having an unmanaged device fleet connecting to your network isn't just some technical glitch. Bring your own device, or BYOD, is a deliberate governance and executive leadership choice. If you allow it, you are actively raising your hand and choosing to accept the associated risks. If MediBec, or honestly any organization, chooses to allow devices onto the network without having lifecycle control over them, meaning they can't force an urgent software update or wipe the device remotely if it gets lost, then they must explicitly accept that risk and define compensating controls. You can't just cross your fingers and hope for the best. Think about it. What happens when a doctor accidentally leaves their personal iPad, which is loaded with cached patient data, in the back of a taxi? Cybersecurity in the mobile age is all about continuous posture monitoring rather than just blindly trusting that an employee's personal device is locked down. And that brings us to Section 6, Securing MediBec's Future Through Active Governance. Let's move to and see how this builds a real solution for MediBec's core challenge. To secure patient data across this crazy, borderless landscape, they need a comprehensive, active governance strategy. Step 1. Implement multi-factor authentication across all systems, because relying solely on passwords is completely dead. Step 2. Enforce strict cloud posture monitoring to catch those tenant-side misconfigurations we talked about earlier. Step 3. Upgrade to WP3 encryption for all wireless networks to lock down those invisible threats floating through the clinic airwaves. And Step 4. Implement robust mobile device management to actually wrangle those remote assets and enforce security baselines. Because modern security, it's a continuous, hyperactive process. So, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own organization's infrastructure. With the traditional perimeter completely gone and your critical data constantly floating between virtualized servers, shared cloud environments, and unmanaged mobile devices, is your data truly secure through active governance? Or are you just hoping for the best? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep questioning your digital borders.